So, good evening, everybody. We are very happy to welcome you yet again on the Friday, though at a different time, and with a very exciting topic today of rebooting businesses. And I would let Rumaji a little later take this up and introduce the topic to you. In the meanwhile, can I request our chairperson, Mrs. Christine Rai, to come up and share a little bit about why we're doing what we're doing today and a little bit more about BAA. Christine?
Helps if I'm unmuted. Good afternoon, everybody. It gives me great pleasure to welcome this very, very interesting and varied panel that we have today. And the topic, as you can see, is rebooting your business. It's actually a good thing to keep looking at, but especially with such a major shift in all our business lives, our economic lives, our personal lives. I think this is really the time to see what's changed, what's going to keep changing. I think it's true to say that we're going to be looking at a lot of changes. From the point of view of the Buying Agents Association, we are often seen as an agent of change, as a catalyst of change. We are the service providers to the MSME sector of industry. And I think collectively, the buying agents and liaison offices in India probably account for about 20 billion of the exports from the apparel, home decor, carpets, handicrafts, furniture, leather sectors. So that's a sizable chunk, and we are also a huge employment generator. We reckon that for every billion exported, 1 million jobs are created. So that's quite an interesting dynamic. So BAA is a very new and young association. We are just 4 years young. Basically, though the industry is not that young, many of us have been in the business for 20, 30 years or more. It's taken quite a long time for us to recognize that we need a voice and that we need to get together both to promote the business out of India from our sector, which is in the smaller towns and smaller areas, as well as to see what we can do to upgrade and to bring our industry forward in all respects. So one of our main focuses is education, knowledge sharing. So we see, this is along the lines of knowledge. What do business owners need to keep looking at to recalibrate their businesses in this day and age? So I don't want to go on for too long. We're excited to hear what our panelists have to share today. So I'm going to ask Ruma and Rohini and Anshul to take this forward, and looking forward to hearing everybody. Thank you very much again, all of you, both the panelists and the participants, for taking time out on your Friday. I know we're all trying to get our businesses back on and get those shipments out before more cancellations start coming in. So this is an exciting time, and let's get to the topic straight away so that we can start. Thank you all.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you so much. I'd like to now introduce our moderators for the session today. Our moderators are Mrs. Ruma Malik. Rumaji, are you there? Because I can't see you on the screen. Rumaji?
Phone is busy, can't reach her through WhatsApp.
Call her, please. Okay. I think there's some internet issue at her end because we can't see her. So let me just take a minute to get her back. So while she's trying to come on board again, I'll at least introduce her. Ruma Malik is one of the older buying agents in the industry. She is a founder member of BAA, and obviously very, very vocal about how buying agents can be very effective instruments in bringing in more trade into the industry. Then we also have Mrs. Rohini Suri. Rohini ji is our knowledge committee head and member of the BA governing body as well. So I hand over the floor to you ladies. Rumaji, would you take this forward now, please?
Certainly. Thank you, Anchal. Thank you, everybody. I'm sorry, my internet is again giving us trouble. So if I fade out, my apologies. Anchal will quickly come in place. We've been talking about the new world. We've been talking and we've been seeing the effects that have happened. Maybe it is fast forwarded something, maybe something would have happened in any way. But we are looking at the socioeconomic realities that will change dramatically. We are seeing political change in many countries. How will this affect us? In India, there'll be downturns, there'll be upswings. We don't know how our economy will cope with the new realities. Manufacturing, will it be significantly affected? Will we go more digital? Will we go more mechanical? Do we have labor? Do we really have knowledge-based labor? What is the requirement for today is a big question. In this scenario, we have a huge amount of entrepreneurs, small, medium, and large. And their question is, how do we secure our business? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? Is our business model strong enough? Is our business model flexible enough? What are the steps which are required to be taken long-term or short-term? What are the legal options we must look at in this changing world? Today, we have an incredible panel of specialists and voices from the industry. They are trailblazers, leaders, entrepreneurs. And today, they're sharing their experience with us at looking at our businesses. To all our attendees, thank you very much for joining us today. For our panelists, I can't tell you how grateful we are that you've given us your time and your experience. Our first speaker that I would like to invite is Ms. Saji Mitra, who's joining us from London. And that is how the world is going to change. We have people from Delhi, from London, from all over India, who are joining us digitally today. So Saji is an independent financial advisor. She's involved in corporate restructuring, financial management, and value modeling the whole industry. She's an investment advisor, an independent director of various companies. She comes to us with a huge amount of experience as a senior portfolio manager at Fortis BNP Paribas, the vice president cash equities Asia Pacific, and it can go on and on and on and on. Her accreditations are far too long for me to give all of them here today. Saji, welcome from London.
Thank you, Ruma. I hope you can hear me loudly because we are having some IT issues in the network and the audio. I'll go directly into the three risks that I see businesses across the board, whether it is in the services sector, whether it's a product-based business. And the first and foremost, obviously, is a financial disruption. Why I call it a disruption and not a collapse, because we have industries and the government and the regulators willing to help, but not able to address specific company-wise or individual cases. So we are having a disruption to which we'll have to find some innovative solutions. We'll have to get industry players, the government, the trade boards together to resolve or find creative solutions to this disruption. Visibility, whether it is for production, for logistics, for labor, is very low at this point of time. This is something I've noticed across the board in most of the accounts that we have been working with, and visibility changing from day to day. So we have a situation where if I ask somebody today, when will you start production? They don't know. If I ask somebody today, do you know if this shipping will go ahead next week? They don't know. If we say, is your labor back? Is your labor available? They don't know. So when you have so little visibility, how do you
Saji, we seem to have lost you.
Lost you a little bit.
3 weeks, 2 months, 3 months? This is an.
Saji?
Shall I just go back a step? Yeah.
I think
Yes, please.
Saji should
Can you hear me?
switch off her video.
Yes.
Saji, just
Okay,
switch
I will-
off your video. It'll help.
Yeah.
And Saji,
Is
I
that
would
better?
also interrupt for a moment here for all the participants who are on the webinar. If in case you have any questions, then please do put them on the Q&A box, and we are going to take it up with the relevant panelists after the speak. Saji, are you there?
Can you hear me? Is that better?
Yes.
Perfect.
Perfect. Yes. Thank you.
So we were talking about financial disruption, and then we were talking about low visibility as being one of the largest or the biggest risk at this point of time. And last but not the least is where the economic modeling or everybody's talking about recession, everybody's talking about very large scale changes in industry, whether it's the end consumer, whether it's your own industry or the production end of it. But nobody really knows on which model or historic model to base it. So you could have extreme optimists on one hand and very big pessimists on the other hand, and so everybody somewhere in between. So today, when we look at businesses, the first thing that we tend to do to help a business get through this period, because we'll all get through this period gradually and step by step, is organization. So understanding how your own business and your team is structured. This particular sector that we are addressing is a people's-based business. So the skill sets that you have built up, the training that you have had, the previous crises that you have managed, all come into play in this particular context. So first step we recommend every single business is to look at your team. What have you got in-house? Who has done what? What is your forte? And how will you best use that to start with? Ideas and solutions come from people. They are not handed to us. There is no regulatory context that will give you a solution that's perfect for your business. So first, you have to find the ideas and the solutions from within. Second is data analysis. Have you got your figures absolutely clear and in control? Do you know where you're spending money, where you're getting money, and how you're getting it, and where the bottlenecks are, and how you will solve them? So crunching your data, having full understanding of your data, and I don't mean just by a cash flow expense in or income in and expense out. Knowing how that income is coming in, what is the profile of your client, who are your clients, and what are the financial drawbacks that your client will have, whether it is seasonality, whether it is the terms of business, whether it is a profile of the client in terms of are they diversified enough, is your next important element. Third point is the whole business structure in terms of regulation, in terms of protection, in terms of government support will change. So now these are shifts. There'll be a lot of what we call business disruption from the point of view that new players will come in, digitization will come in, the terms of trade between countries will change dramatically. We're already seeing, before COVID, we saw this happen between US and China. And the risk is that we will see it between every other country. Protectionism will be on the rise. And so as a country, and coordination or collaboration between the state and businesses is absolutely vital for the survival of Indian industry. If I just look at UK, the biggest part of our business is obviously with the European continent. And then if I look at the UK's export-import, the next biggest is with China. And then the third is India. So if India today wants to substitute what China is losing, whether it is for the US or for Europe, whether there is an antagonism in terms of politics that will reflect on our business, we have to be thinking on our feet 6 months to 12 months to 2 years ahead where we want to go. And accordingly, because what is good is that there is an association, there is a sort of grouping together, teamwork which is happening between industry players, and it's to use that to go forward and push a policy. So not wait for policy to come to you, but to prepare a policy in terms of how will India be competitive in this new environment. So relook your business model on the individual corporate level, but also relook it as an industry. Where do you want to take the industry? And then as industry leaders, as players in the market, small, big, medium, find out where your interdependence is on your teams and on your competitors. People might be more specialized in one area than another. And to understand that those, as an association, is to understand those specialities and push forward for the success of the whole industry. The competitive environment will be very, very tough. There will be a lot of trade malpractices. We're already seeing that, and I think the legal analysts will address that more appropriately. But there will be a lot of trade malpractices within the industry as well as from the clients. So question is to anticipate how this will happen. When under tremendous duress, people act in ways we do not expect them to. So have your contingency plans in place. And this is something some of you and Ruma, you might have already heard me drone on and on about, is contingency planning. It is not saying that we will fail in something, it is being prepared. So for every scenario, have your contingency plan. Include your teams in your contingency plan, because if you, for example, don't know how to solve something, another team member might just have a better plan. It might seem incredible, totally unrealistic, but they might have a plan that works. They might have faced an environment or a situation which puts them in a place to solve the problem. At the end of the day, we have to be thinking on not on our feet, but on our toes, because there will be need for rapid execution. Things might change from one day to the next. Your consumer will change, your client will change, your bank will change, your insurer will change their behavior. That is what happens in crises, when they're very deep crises, because nobody was prepared for this. We can take on a blame game. It will not solve anything. We can say whoever started the virus, whoever ends the virus, does not matter. What matters at this point of time is for the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 2 months, that your businesses come above and learn to swim with this new wave. So I will take questions later. I'm sure there'll be a lot of specific questions, but just to recap, get your data together, look at your team internally and look at your industry externally, and think of your contingency planning in a positive, structural way that prepares you to take every wave on. Thank you, Ruma.
Thank you,
I hope
Saji.
that answers your question.
As concise as always. If I was to just put that down for us to take a note of, first, I think is core strength, identify, collaborate, and always have a plan B.
You might
Correct?
even think of plan B, C, and D.
And E and F and G as well.
Yeah.
Correct.
So
Thank you so much.
For the benefit of all the attendees, what we have just discussed, we will lay it out in a more formatted, like a tick box context, and I will email it out to the association afterwards, so that people can use that as a framework to figure out, just as a thinking platform. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Rohini, can I hand the floor to you now?
Rumaji, before
All
we
right.
go ahead, there is one
Achal,
Sorry.
Achal.
Yes.
We have one question from Mohan Kapoor. when you said, Saji, there is a change of scenario and we need to analyze and relook at strategy as to how to look forward vis-a-vis industry. I believe Mohan comes with a question here from that perspective saying there has been a change in our own industry where we are now organizing virtual shows instead of physical shows. His question is, do we feel it is convenient for buyers and suppliers, and how without physical touch is it possible? So, any experience? Frankly, I don't think any of us have the experience today. So, I would actually ask you if you can throw some bit of your views on it, because I believe this is more of an experience driven question, which none of us in today's date and time have any valid data, as you were talking about, or any experience. So, lot will be going forward. But if you can share some thoughts, and maybe Rumaji, you can also share some of your thoughts vis-a-vis the virtual show of EPC.
Sorry, may I come in at this stage? I know it's not my turn,
No,
but
please.
can we do one thing? Can we take the questions all together? Because otherwise, you're going to disrupt the flow as it goes. So let the panelists finish speaking, because there may be answers to this as far as the other panelists are concerned. So please keep the questions. Otherwise, you will have a discussion after every this thing, and you will not have enough time. So the way to conduct this webinar is that finish with the panelists, finish with the speakers, and then the questions may be posed to individual speakers. Otherwise, you will, this discussion, I can come in also and give my views, and I hope you get my point. So please let us do that. Let us have all the questions bunched together after the panelists have finished speaking. That's my suggestion. Thank you.
Are you okay with that, Rumaji? Shall we move
Sure.
on?
Let's go with it.
Yeah? Perfect.
Let's go with it. Yes, definitely. It's a brilliant suggestion. Thank you.
So, Rohini,
Thank
over to you now.
Thank you, Achal and Ruma and Saji. We kicked it off very well. I'm going to be introducing Kadambari Puri, who is a managing partner with UCall, a legal firm in Delhi and Bangalore, and also India bound. She has many projects under her head as a legal expert on a senior advisor with NDMC and Fortune 500 companies. Going with what Saji just said in terms of mitigating risks, one of the key discussions that we need to have today with Kadambari is how do we plan mitigating risks for our industry, especially the export industry, which we represent, the factories that we work with, the buyers who are now going through a downward curve in everything from Corona to businesses, and the contract business, specifically, how should the contracts be shaped to help us mitigate those risks for the future? Kadambari, over to you. You have to put your mic on, Kadambari. Kadambari, your mic is not on. Kadambari.
I think you can unmute. Ankit, you can unmute. Yeah.
No, actually, I lost the screen. I pressed some button and I could not see all of you for some time because, I went back to the next page, the previous page.
Did you hear what I said, or shall I start again?
I could hear, but I could not find the button to unmute myself.
All right, great. So over to you, Kadambari. Let's see how do we mitigate risks in a new business cycle that we are facing today.
Yeah.
It's an unprecedented time and a very interesting time in history for us to be in. So
Yeah,
Kadambari, over to you.
I think all of us are in all professions, all businesses. We are facing this very surreal kind of situation, which we never thought we'll find ourselves in. Saji has pointed out certain things which I've just noted. She has pointed out certain concerns regarding production, being uncertain, there being uncertainty about when production will start, which is there, which we know as lawyers, a lot of businesses are coming back to us, asking us whether we can go back to, again, go back to office lot of businesses, in fact, majority of businesses I find want to return back to office rather than work from home, which is surprising because there are certain companies which can easily have a hybrid model, work from home through the virtual office and the physical office. So Saji also mentioned that contingency planning is something which is required. And now, Rohini, you are saying that what are the mitigating factors that one should adopt when one should look at one's contract? I think currently we are looking at the contractual matrix, which has already gone by. So let us look at our situation, the contractual, the other risks involved, which we find ourselves in. We are looking at a global recession. We are looking at situations where we either have a very good contract which specifies the force majeure clause, which you so often hear about. That well-drafted contract would probably also have covered all the provisions of jurisdiction, which is becoming very important in international business. Because if you do not have a contract, yes, of course, a concluded contract will be deemed on account of there being electronic exchange, but the other miscellaneous terms, in fact, now those very miscellaneous terms have become so important: force majeure, liquidated damages, indemnifications, and arbitration, the seat of arbitration, and the laws which would apply. So if you are in a situation where the contract is there, then I would suggest that first of all, understand clearly what is your contractual matrix, what are your strengths which are coming out of the contract. A lot of people I find are totally unaware of that, and they've not even assessed that what are their strengths and weaknesses. So when you understand where you are vis-a-vis, the person who's either expecting you to perform your contractual obligations, or vis-a-vis somebody you are expecting, to deliver something, and he's not doing it, that is where you need to assess and then take decisions. Second, if you do not have a contract, then also it is best to understand what is the communication that has gone by, what is the understanding, decipher the understanding. Thereafter, you must plan. For instance, I'll just give you an example. In case of a commercial lease, now, if you are just not taking action right now, and tomorrow you want to justify that you have taken a big commercial office, you want to invoke, and in fact, your contract also provides for a suspension of rent, for instance, in case of unforeseen event. So when we talk about a force majeure clause, it has to be unforeseen, an unforeseen event. So therefore, when the contract took place, this COVID would not have started. So for the contracts which were executed in January, February, when the COVID epidemic had already spread, it is no longer unforeseen. So for something like that, you will have to scrutinize whether you can quickly invoke the force majeure or not. Because if you do not invoke and the right is there in your contract to you, then again you lose out. Secondly, I find that a lot of everybody, China, as Saji mentioned, China has given force majeure certificates. Indian government, again, in their supply procurement circular, they have categorically stated that this we are treating as force majeure. And subsequently, they've released a clarification saying that this applies only to the government contracts. So by the government's recognizing any event as a force majeure does not mean anything unless your private contract is scrutinized. Now, force majeure, when you rush to invoke force majeure, it does not necessarily mean that you're going to be allowed to rescind it. You are allowed to get out of it. That is a very mistaken belief of this concept of force majeure or doctrine of frustration. What it can lead to, depending on your case to case. For instance, the order has been placed. You are in India. The buyer is based out of the US. The buyer says that, look, this epidemic has taken place. I am suffering financial losses, so I'm canceling the entire contract. And you here have diligently acted upon the contract. You've already undertaken all that production, which was supposed to be delivered up by a particular time. he is not justified to say that he is facing any financial constraint, and so therefore he, because of crisis, he's able to wriggle out of it. So then again, there may be supply chain disruptions because there are restrictions which have been imposed by different governments. The protectionist policies are there. So there may be instance that where you have to deliver a good, the import duties have gone up in order to protect the local manufacturers over there. In that case, you cannot, you can only try and negotiate with the buyer, but you cannot refuse to perform the contract just because it has become more onerous for you to perform. And if there are any alternative modes of performance, you have to adhere to them. So therefore, the law universally all over, you can take US, India, Europe, even the common law jurisdiction like England, all of these jurisdictions basically have the same thread of legal understanding that the contract must be performed if it can be. And no matter how onerous it is, financial crunch is not a force majeure unless you have a contract where you had written that if there is a recession, or if the prices escalation go up and down by this much, then these are the consequences. So the benefit of having a force majeure, now taking a cue from this, now onwards, whatever contracts you are going to sign, even in your communication when you are making a quotation, which is, I understand in a lot of industries, there is not a practice of having detailed contracts. It is either based on trust or a general commercial practice. So even then, what you could do is, to protect yourselves, you could incorporate certain clauses there itself that this quotation is being made subject to these conditions. And if that contract or if that quotation is accepted, if your offer is accepted, that would mean in the present form, in the manner that you gave that offer. So these are the things you can look at. There are other issues. Rohini, do tell me if I go a little beyond my time. Please do.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
I just try to wrap up whatever I have to say. So besides frustration of contracts and breaches, we have issues of labor, wages. So Indian government had passed directives to pay wages, and that was quite a contentious issue because for some time, there were petitions before the Supreme Court. In fact, yesterday only there has been an order by the Supreme Court where, so when the petitions were filed before the Supreme Court, the MHA order, the directive was also taken back, it was withdrawn. Now the question is, during that period, could the government have bound down the employers to pay wages or not to reduce the salaries? The court has actually come down to observing that you could not have, it cannot be so arbitrary or unreasonable that you tell all the employers to pay 100% of wages. There could have been a rational criteria, 50%, 70%. So these are the observations of the court. However, the final order is yet to come because a lot of employers were not able to pay complete wages. So they are awaiting the decision of the court. Then there is an issue of liquidated damages. So there is a breach and the contract says, okay, you will pay these many liquidated damages. However, as per law, you need to prove your losses also. So as a reasonable person, now that you are in the midst of crisis, as a reasonable person, my suggestion would be to mitigate and to try and see. So if you have unsold stocks, after giving a notice to the buyer, you would probably want to sell it off in the open market at the best rates that you can get. So you're mitigating losses, and whatever is the difference is what, but after giving a notice to the buyer, after closing that chapter, if there is a recession, then thereafter you can make claims against the person who has rescinded the contract. Coming to recession, coming to making your claims, if there is an arbitration clause which specifies the jurisdiction, you are bound by it. So my suggestion is always choose a jurisdiction which is cheaper to handle. So while jurisdictions like London and Singapore are the preferred destinations, but I think India currently has with the recent amendments, has really emerged as a very, very good option to the entire world, to be seen as a very good arbitration hub. The timelines are stipulated. It's unlike the previous times when an arbitration case could go on for years and years together. It is time bound. Otherwise, the arbitration is taken away from the arbitrator and given to the other one, to the next one at the same stage, to be decided in a fixed time. Now, if you do not have an arbitration agreement, what would you do? You would file a civil suit, and you will see where the cause of action arises. Now, here we enter an area which is more onerous. You may be able to file a claim here. You may be able to, after a few years, depending on which court you are allowed to approach. So you may be able to get the decree in your hand. But what would you do with the paper decree? You have to enforce it. So when you enforce it, where would you enforce it? You would enforce it where the assets are there and the party is there. So so it would be a good idea that at the very initial stage of invoking arbitration or filing a civil suit, if that party has any assets in India, if there are any payments to be made within the jurisdiction, probably you could look at attaching them, or probably you could look at having the party to pay a security deposit. And I think the mantra is it's a game of nerves. All litigation is a game of nerves. So you need to not just give up saying that I will not be able to do it, because it is often seen that the party which will go ahead to prosecute its claims and in a very strategic manner. Sometimes you may even have a weak case, but if you are there to take it on, there may be a big chance of a negotiation taking place. So that is what everybody is aiming for. Even the person who has rescinded the contract is not really looking at the court route. He also may be biding his time to see how far you will go. So the idea is to assess, to push your advantage as best as you can, and thereafter try to settle if you can. So these are the things I can, and then, since businesses want to return back, what are the safety protocols? So this month itself, new safety protocols have been released by Ministry of Health, which are mandatory. And yes, all these directives, unless they are set aside, they are mandatory, because the government has the power under the Disaster Management Act and the Epidemics Act to take measures to call upon anybody, be it a private party, individual, a company, to take steps which they think would be in the interest of the public at large. Now, getting back into business will have, in the new normal, some businesses will resort to work from home policy, some hybrid, so you will have to see the matrix which evolves for you, and accordingly your policies will have to change. So like I was sharing with somebody yesterday, there's a client of mine who had undertaken all protocols, but his unit was closed down for 6 days because somebody lodged a complaint. Video was circulated which pertained to the last year video, saying that no social distancing, no safety protocols were being taken. So he actually had to produce his CCTVs, go to the authorities, show that everything was in order. So documentation here becomes very, very important. So we say that justice should not only be done, it should seem to be done also. So your documentation should be, proper. Then you will also have to see concerns of the privacy policy that you have. You take the consent from from your employees that you are checking their temperature or whatever safety measures you want them to do, which may involve, looking at them, their personal health. So the undertakings may be taken. The contractors is, again, I just wrap it up. The last point which I find very important is that not only you, but your contractors, you have to be very careful that the contractors are also complying with all their contractual, with their, the obligations vis-a-vis their workers, because unless they are, you as a principal employer may also face problems. So these are the things, and I think that about sums it up. I can
Thank
give
you.
a list of the policies that are required and the safety protocols I can share with the association.
Thank you so much, Kadambari. I must say, I think the attendees as well as the panelists here, I've come across today a wonderful person who looks at mutual arbitration. In spite of being a lawyer, she's giving the way out that as a business, you need to do mutual arbitration. And of course, the current contracts which are going to change because of government notifications and government, should I say, interference in the businesses because of Corona and COVID requirements. All those things are now going to be coming in, and the interface with the government has increased quite a lot. And I think that we do need to protect ourselves with contracts on those issues, especially with government today and with our employees, so that any incidents like this that you mentioned should not crop up in the future with any one of us. Thank you so much, Kadambari. I'm sure there'll be questions for you, but Aanchal is going to take on now, and we will get to hear from you soon enough. Thank you so much, Kadambari. Really wonderful advice you've given to the very practical
I'm glad.
and very sure. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Aanchal?
Rumaji, over to you, since we'll be
Yes.
taking questions at the end.
Thank you. We're going one step at a time. So first we heard Saji saying, look at your businesses, plan for B, C, D, E, F. Kadambari telling us, look at your contracts, safeguard your interests in the most practical way forward. And now we have Harminder Sahni. Harminder Sahni, for me, is how do you look at your business? When do you look at your business? When do you know some drastic steps need to be taken? Harminder is the founder and managing director of Wazir Advisors, a consulting firm offering a comprehensive range of services to create, to compete, and grow their consumer-centric business in retail, CPG, textiles, apparel, and skilling sectors. So Harminder, when do we know we need to take hard decisions? And how do we do that? Over to you.
See, I think most of the people who are in the business, they don't need to ask anybody. It's just your guts tell you. But there are two circumstances very clearly to oversimplify the matter, and I am cut out to look at things in a simpler manner, so can't do otherwise. That you simply look at either there is an opportunity which makes you to take harder, or makes you to take major calls about the business, or is it the challenges which you are facing, right? These are the two instances when you have to take major decisions, because we'll be taking routine decisions in our business on a day-to-day basis anyway, whether in terms of growth or whether in terms of operation, costs, etc. People will be doing that. But you see an opportunity and you say that now we need to do something about it. This opportunity is not letting me rest. I have to take some major decision. So either it will be in terms of making investments or hiring people or a new category to get into, something you have to do there. Second is the challenges right now, which we are facing. All of us are facing this challenge, and we believe that we need to take some major calls about our business. But if you think deeply, and I'll bring it to the present situation here in COVID's case, that most of the people, first 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, when we were going, it looked like everything is going for, it's a disaster, right? Within 4 weeks, we started reconciling. From denial, we started coming to accepting that this is what it is. And many challenges which we are able to see in our businesses, actually they have nothing to do with COVID. These challenges were always there. We were just blind to those, and we believe that this is the way how the business is done, and this is the business always will be. So I think this has given us an opportunity to actually face those challenges. Similarly, on the opportunity side also, I think Saji said it, that there are people who are extreme optimists and the people who are very pessimistic about it. So I have no embarrassment in saying that I fall on the other extreme of being a very optimistic person always. Somehow, again, thank God for that. I have this way of looking at it, nothing of my own doing. But the fact of the matter is, very quickly one could see that what have we been doing? Our businesses are small, right? Across the board, right? Barring few companies in India, most of the businesses are small and medium businesses. We keep on changing the definition, whatever government likes. But the fact of the matter is most of the companies in India are small and medium businesses. They are much larger than from where they started because everybody started from zero, right? And everybody has their own ambition and their own expectations from life. So they may feel that they've done very well. But at a global scale, most of us are very small and medium businesses. And that's because these kind of challenges, if 3 weeks lockdown, and most of us wondering that how are we going to pay salaries, right? Must tell us something about our business, not about COVID, not about anything else, right? Most of us feeling that we need to get some respite from the government to either not pay our EMIs or to get some interest subvention, something. To start with, just with a 3-4 weeks lockdown, what does it mean? Out of 52 weeks, if you are going to lose 3 or 4 weeks, just do the maths. It shouldn't be that bad. But all of us know that we felt and we actually took actions to save ourselves from almost, it felt like near-death experience. What kind of businesses we are in? And I'm telling you, businesses could be 1 crore turnover to 10,000 crore turnover. They all behave the same way. So it doesn't matter how many zeros you have because that many challenges also multiply the same way. So that's where I think major decisions to be taken, but not in these kind of circumstances that you take major decisions on the challenges side. Challenges were always there and they will remain, and you need to think about with a calm head, not at the time when you're disturbed, because you will cause further disturbance. At this point of time, when we have time saved from commuting, from traveling, from trying to, let's say, just be nice to people, because if somebody comes to meet you in office, you can't finish that meeting in 10 minutes. But the video call can be. You are home, I am home, I've done our discussion in 10 minutes, now we can be off to something else. But if somebody comes to my office or I go to somebody's office, an hour is a given. So all that time which is left, I think, should be spent positively looking at the opportunities, what are coming in our way, right? So that was the one part of Ruma which you asked me to speak about, where do we need to take major decisions? I am saying not right now, but if at all, take major decisions in terms of that, why the hell we are so small as a business. Whatever is your size, because I'm sure you can find role models across the world. People are far, far bigger than in the same business, doing the same thing. Why we have chosen to remain small, and I think everyone will have to look for their own answer. The second point was, and I think again, which is a very fairly, let's say, universal question, and again, not to do with COVID, that how do we evaluate that if you want to sell our business to somebody, right? So answer to that is very simple. First question you need to ask yourself, why sell?
Right.
Well, I believe the only thing which you should ever be investing in is yourself and then your own business. Right? Buying anybody else's business, even one single share, means that that's the money for which you do not have the confidence to put in your own business. That's why you are going and investing somebody in real estate, somewhere other assets are de-risking, personal side different. But saying that I want to sell my business, it's a very big question one should answer. Why do I want to sell my business? There could be various reasons. Succession could be one, right? Life stage could be another reason, right? Third could be, now you are rich enough to believe that I don't need to take all these issues, take these challenges all the time. Bahut ho gaya. I don't want to do it anymore. So very personal. But otherwise, selling a business, I think, doesn't make sense at any point of time, right? Now the second part, question, okay, you decided to sell. Is your business sellable? What are you trying to sell? If it's a highly personalized business, running on your whims and fancies and with your charm and with your charisma, how are you going to sell it? Your relationship, right? Your processes, the way they run it, nobody can come in and take over. So if you have been not running this business as a shareholder, right, then you cannot sell shares of a company in which you are not running it as a shareholder. So for any business to be a sellable business, you need to see that, are you running it as a shareholder? Only then you can sell shares to somebody and he can come in and run this business as a shareholder. But if it is not, trust me, it doesn't require too much diligence. Couple of meetings and a visit to somebody's office will give you the answer. This business is not viable or this business is not saleable. So you have to, if you ever want to sell your business, you have to start preparing for the sale many, many years in advance. You cannot do it like now I want to sell it and can I sell this business? That is a tricky part, very, very tricky part. And third, you want to sell it, it's a sellable business. What is the value of this business? Right? So value of the business, people like me can tell you that we have got a lot of mathematical models, benchmarking, will give you the answer. But the value of the business always is a number which two people agree to, those who matter. The one who is selling and the one who is buying. That's the only number. Rest all is math, right? And rest all is for people like us to make some money to survive. Otherwise, anything, right? So the value of the business becomes, and then you go back to the first question. For this value, am I going to sell this business? Because this business gives me cash flow. This business gives me livelihood. It keeps me fruitfully engaged and gives me opportunity to expand, diversify whatever I want to do because I have a mothership which will take care of that. The day you will not have the business, then one will realize that how lonely it is and how difficult it is to get even smallest of things done, right? So it goes back to the same question. So that's the full circle. That how do you think about selling a business? How do you evaluate it? And I would say absolutely practical manner. This is exactly how I advise my clients every day, small or big. This is how we look at it. Then there was buying. So when do you think of buying a business, right? Very interesting point. And I love buyers because somebody is so excited not only about their own business, is getting super excited about somebody else's business also. Let's go and buy it. But the only trouble is that when you are buying a business, you should be very clear what you are buying. You should not be buying somebody's headache. Or you should not be buying somebody. Like they say now about children, and please people don't take me otherwise. They say it's very difficult to, let's say, bring up children. So one of the doctors, when we went to first time, we were expecting, said the children are rascals. And I really didn't like it. But later I realized that it makes sense. You must be meeting a lot of kids every day. So bringing up your own children is tough, right? Then saying that bringing up somebody else's child, obviously, very, very difficult. And child who is actually a rotten apple, right, could be a big trouble. So are you buying it for technology, some IP they have, some customers they have, or maybe just the cash flow, or just the consolidation opportunity is making it look attractive that two put together will be far more efficient or otherwise not. But yes, like I'm saying that don't look at selling, but on the other side, I'm saying that you should always be looking to buy. If you are a serious business person, you should always be looking to buy because there'll always be people, either they are losing interest or they don't see value in business, which you can see, or there is a succession issue, or some challenges like COVID right now and people in panic may be willing to get rid of this business because they believe the business is the problem. We have to get rid of it. While that's not always true. That's not always true. So I think that's how one should look at it. Be very clear what exactly are you looking for to buy. You're not buying a business. There are various other things within that which you need to be very, very specific about. And that's how you will value it. And you should know the value in your mind, that is what you'll pay, and go with that. So last point, 2 more minutes for me, that opportunity, where do you see Marcus opportunity? And I know that I'm talking to Bike Engines Association here. And I very strongly believe, guys, you have one of the biggest opportunities right now in front of you. Biggest opportunity ever. And where it's starting from, why I'm saying so, is starting from something which I believe 100% is untrue. But just that, right? That China is going to lose and we are going to win. Don't get into the details because I'm telling you, it's absolutely bullshit. It doesn't mean anything. But just take this as excitement of that headline and run after it. And we have started doing that within our firm, and we have seen there's so many things which China does we don't even do. Forget about, let's say, having little share. We have 0 share. We don't do these things. What are those things? So all our clients who are in textiles start getting excited about, let's make these PPE overalls, let's make the mask, let's make some healthcare, disposable clothing, bed sheets, etc. Okay, fine, do that, because like there's the old saying, when you ask a cobbler, 2 + 2 will say 4 shoes, right? That's how it is. So when they every textile, because we are in textile, we only think about that. But now we are talking these hygiene, healthcare, textiles in hospital, but just look around, right? That what all goes into a hospital and how many things they consume, how many things they buy. Clothing is nothing, or textiles within that is very, very small percentage, and we are only stuck on that. So it's like saying within this country, we have the subcontinent, we have an example. In India, we have Madras check. So let's start making shirts and make money. And I know of people, Gautam I'm sure knows them personally also very well, the people who made, let's say, $1 shirt and they sold it for 20 and they made their fortunes from those time, Madras check. India, we have the Madras check, that's what we'll sell. But there's no $1 billion business, probably Shahi is close to that in India. But Mahesh Malin in Sri Lanka, and Gautam, bear with me if I'm exaggerating the point just to make a good story here, but he decided that I don't want to do anything which any Sri Lankan garment exporter is doing around 30 years ago. and he picked up lingerie and intimate wear, which nobody did out of Sri Lanka at that point of time, right? So even the raw material, training, everything which went into it, he had to import and then do it. Today, it's a $1 billion business. I believe one of the most profitable, most professionally run business, because he went after the opportunity. He didn't go after the resources, like a typical TV cooking show where they say, "Ye to ghar mein hota hai, ye bhi yahan hota hai." Kuch nahi hota hai. And you're trying to cook something with whatever is available in the house. No, just look wider. You can get anything. You can buy any ingredient. Just be ambitious that what kind of meal you want to go after today. And he went after that, right? I think that's the opportunity even beyond textile apparel. Within healthcare, we looked at multi-billion dollar opportunities going a-bagging. And China does almost $3 trillion worth of exports. That's India's GDP. India does $300 billion of exports. Let's forget about talking about China. Vietnam does 240 billion, right? And in a year or two, they will be ahead of us. So I think why I'm saying that you guys have this biggest opportunity, you just need to shift from thinking what can be bought from India. Just start thinking what can be made in India. You still will be doing the same job. You still will be finding those customers. You still be getting those orders and giving it to people. Go beyond this part where you say that, okay, you have this factory and I can buy this from you for this and sell it further. I'll keep your lines busy, etc. Start talking to the same people. Let's diversify. I have orders for these products I can get. You need to invest in it. You need to start building those capacities. India is one of the largest and the best countries to buy stainless steel. Just the sanitized stainless steel tools and the knives and those trays, etc., which go into the hospital. That market itself is 3 times bigger than all the textile which goes into hospitals, right? And I'm sure there's much more money to be made there, right? Because these are not disposable items. They're durability. They're very many things. Just look at a company called Cardinal Health, right? That's just one website you need to go to, and you'll see that how much goes into hospital, right? And as buying agents, because you people know how to impress upon international customers, how do you present to them, how do you get those orders on this side? I think rest of us are maybe on the lazier side, but we are willing to work hard. We're willing to put factories and do that. Please help us do that, help the country do that. So go beyond buying from India. Let's look at how do we make in India, which can be sold to the world. It will be harder work a little bit, but right now the opportunity is great because yes, people are looking for alternatives, but very soon if they don't find it, they'll go away. It's your job to give them that confidence. They will not come to somebody who is making, let's say, equipment, or let's say making hand tools. Nobody will go to a hand tool guy maker saying that you make a surgical equipment, but he can. But since you are the buying agent, you can talk about surgical instrument as well as hand tools as well as textile. You have that opportunity. That manufacturer doesn't have it. So that's Uma. That's Uma.
Wow, Harvinder, what a closing. That is, after a long time, I'm hearing somebody from the industry talk so eloquently about the need for buying agents. We are always shouting about it from the top of rooftops, and nobody's listening most of the time.
I have been listening.
So, Mr. Davar, I hope you are listening too. That I definitely believe that the service industry, not only the product industry, but also the service industry is something that we have a huge opportunity in every business. India is just about 1% or 2% of its potential. And in fact, I was speaking at another seminar where I was talking about, labor not coming back to the factories. And I was saying, why can't you go to the labor? Why can't you set up industry where the labor is and use them there? You'll have a lot of problems reduced in your urban centers, and mechanization and everything else is possible wherever you are. Technology is possible wherever you are. So I do hope the government will take heed that we've got a huge labor force. We just have to use them productively. And India is not even touching 1% or 2% of its potential that it can be at. So thank you. I think our panelists have been just amazing. And now on the other side, we have industry speak, voices from the industry. Mr. Sanjay Agarwal, he's the Senior Vice Chairperson of the PhD CCI. Mr. Davar, the Chairperson of SEPC. And Mr. Gautam Nair, who's the owner of the Matrix group of companies. So I would like to ask the industry, what do you make of what our panelists have to say? Do you have questions for them? Would you like to give our attendees something to think about? Mr. Agarwal, we would love to hear your opinion.
Well, I think we have had a very interesting talk till now, and I think each of the panelists covered, totally different subjects, so which makes it more useful, in fact, for all of us. Saji covered the financial aspects and the need to review strengths and weaknesses in this situation. I was very, myself didn't know that India is the third largest trade partner for UK after Europe and China. So I think that gives us an existing strong point on which to build upon with UK. My company itself is also exporting some reasonable amounts to UK. But I never knew that India has that big a pie with UK as a
Where's the charger? Where's your charger?
Then, of course, the legal points were very aptly cleared by Kadambari Puri. I think force majeure is something which cuts both ways. We need to take advantage of force majeure sometimes when we are the tenants, and we can be cut very hard when it's our customer who's claiming that same privilege. So, everything, of course, depends on the individual situation. So, of course, there are technical issues like wage, which directly does not concern the buying agents association, but it does concern your primary constituency, your manufacturers, and which is a major concern again. Let me just tell you that on the one hand, manufacturers have been very much perturbed over having to pay salaries for the period when their factories were shut down. But at the same time, they are also equally perturbed about the shortage of labor.
Yes.
And they are also willing to pay higher.
Yes.
You might have heard or read in the papers about some cases where flight tickets have been sent from some builders in Hyderabad. So you see, it's a situation which only reflects to you both, pessimism or problems or the fears on both sides. On one hand, one is afraid that what happens if my factory is not going to run for 6 months and I keep paying salaries and I'll go bankrupt. The other is I must run my factory when there is some business, and then even if I have to, or I must do my contract, I must make my building, even if I have to fly in the workers or I have to offer some 50% higher wages. So, I think these are very, very standard conundrums that most of the constituency of BA is, having to face. BA itself, your members themselves also must be facing it to some extent, to quite an extent, considering that the fixed expenses, even in your case, would not be, that low. But it becomes much more proportionately higher for your manufacturers, right? I think Harminder has given absolutely the right approach in all this confusion, which is to, cut it out with a knife, not, ascribe reason to it and just be optimistic. So I think that's the right approach. So let's do that. At the same time, yes, we must identify what we can do in India, and and just go through and try and sell. That is most important. The example of surgical equipment, surgical blades and surgical instrument being manufactured in India, which is not being done today, it's a very apt example. And I think if all of you pick up on it, maybe you could create a whole new export industry. But let me just share. I was just looking at the data from PSD, our survey. We have some 3,000 respondents to our survey, 2780 something to be exact, for a survey that we carried out post a webinar just, I think, last week, in which we had a fair sprinkling of startups, medium enterprises, small enterprises, and even large enterprises. Even the large enterprises were around 15%. What we found were that the concerns across the size spectrum were similar. The concerns started from ability to pay wages for the shutdown period if it is extended beyond a point, to availability of finance, to the market situation. You know, there were 5, 6 standard concerns which were reflected across, and broadly you could, you can, one moment please. Broadly you could divide them between finance, markets, and labor, which is what almost everybody is facing today. So, specifically with the products that you have addressed, again, looking at the numbers for April, I think your products are the biggest, have taken the largest hit. Most of the export products that are covered by buying agents, whether it is leather or handicrafts or garments, textiles, I saw between 80 to 90% reduction in exports versus April last year. Now that is something which should be a matter of concern for your trade, as to why others have been able to do not so badly compared to a product where there is a professional body of buying agents who are actually, practically speaking, the selling agents also. Right? You are ultimately responsible for sending the product out of India from the Indian manufacturer. So is there something that we missed out in this trade? Because I can just open, if you give me a moment, I can just read out that list, or I can have it mailed to your members. It's amazing, you know, all the bottom 5 numbers where we have the most professional representation of the manufacturing, Indian manufacturer. There, if we are having this problem, it could be because of the product profile itself. Yes, where the product has to go on a retail shelf and the retailer is not interested in lifting the goods, fine. But is it also something else? So that's something I would recommend to your association. Other than that, I believe we are all businesses which the biggest problem we face is, this is a problem that has come. We think that is receding because the country is now into opening of the lockdown, as it is called phase 1. But the concern is what happens when there is a community transmission, which we are afraid of, and which happens. And again, after 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, there is a fallback. Now, when such fallback happens, whatever planning we have done, that planning would again need to be recalibrated totally. So the time, we have to be optimistic, but at the same time, we have to be careful not to be taking too many broad bets on any fresh expenditure, and try and keep our expenditures within a manageable level, at least till we are sure that the pandemic is under in some sort of a control. Right now, we don't know when the blowback might come. So we need to be a bit careful. That's again an individual businessman's opinion. I'm not speaking that as a chamber or anything, but I think it's something that we all have to take our decisions, but then individual opportunities that are coming our way are also different. So I think with that, I would pass the baton over to the next speaker. And if there's any query from me, I'll be very happy to.
Thank you, sir. Next, we have Mr. Dawar, who is the chairperson of the SEPC. So on one side, we've had Mr. Agarwal talk about the manufacturing sector. And Mr. Dawar, we would like to know what you see as the opportunities and the challenges for the services sector in our country. Mr. Dawar?
Mr. Dawar, you have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, can you hear me now? Sorry.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
First, let me thank your association first for inviting me to participate in this webinar. Also the fact that whatever interaction I have had with BAA and your members over a period of time in the SEPC has shown me that your association is extremely committed to your members and to what you do. Third is this, that Let me also convey on behalf of SEPC that we are were following up before with DGFT for the claims of buying agents to be recognized and to be eligible for the SEIS incentive scheme. Unfortunately, this pandemic has derailed those efforts, but we are continuing to do that.
Thank you, sir.
Also, thank you. No, it's absolutely our responsibility and our duty. Before that, let me, for those of you who are not aware, let me give you a little brief background about SEPC. It was formed almost a decade ago, but it wasn't very active. The last 3, 4, 5 months, we have really wanted to move ahead, and we have moved ahead in many directions to try and seriously represent the service export industry. Our members contribute over $50 billion of service exports every year. And in this overall scheme, we do not look at the IT sector. The IT sector has export this thing of over $85 billion. And the rest, $120 billion plus, is the rest of the service export industry. There are 14 champion sectors. What we have done in the past 3-4 months is initiated a lot of discussion with the ministry. You are aware that the Commerce Minister before the lockdown was keen on doing away with the SEIS scheme, as they were going to also remodel the MEIS scheme. But we have prevailed upon him. We have done our surveys, and we have prevailed upon him to continue with the scheme at least for the next 2 years. And a proposal is there between before the Ministry of Finance, Department of Revenue, and we hope to get some sort of we will get a positive response. They are looking at not giving this to some sectors, but we will continue our fight for that. We are actively working with embassies all over the world on these issues, and we will be briefing members of BAA about this, and they are very welcome to become a part of this exercise. So this is what we are doing as far as SEPC is concerned. And our task is very difficult because every other industry in the manufacturing sector, they have their own representative export promotion councils. Whereas here we are representing a plethora of services, every service under the sun. And this pandemic has caused huge disruption to our core sectors like travel and tourism, medical value tourism, aviation, and so on and so forth. Now, I've heard the earlier speakers, I've heard some of them come from a very optimistic point of view. And I would like to think that I'm more of a realist than either being an optimist or being a pessimist. So from the point of realism, to talk of the future now, future, of course, for the next 6 months is of survival. It is not that we can sit down and completely, I am in the media business, which is what I do apart from my other activities. And as you know, the media business is going through a huge churn as of the moment. We are publishers of in-flight magazines. We publish for 3 airlines. So you can understand the cleft that we are sort of caught in. So the next 6 months is going to be a huge entrepreneurial challenge for all of us. And it is like we either sink or we swim. And those of us who don't know how to swim will have to learn how to swim in these conditions. And it is not that we can today and somebody can just give us advice, you completely reconfigure your business, or you completely innovate, or you start thinking of doing something else and all. It cannot be done. We are not Nokia who many years ago evolved from a conglomerate into timber and into various materials and became one of the largest handset manufacturers in the world. So it's not for us to do that. One other thing I keep on listening to is technology, technology, technology. And sorry. And you know how technology is working even in this little webinar, where we are losing stream of each other, where we are losing images. So technology by itself is not the answer. We have all graduated, you know, we graduated from typewriters to computers to fax machines to emails to mobiles to WhatsApp to now Zoom calls. So to run any business, COVID or no COVID, you needed a technology base. And you needed to adapt the latest technology, especially as a means of communication, not only a one-to-one communication, but as a means of cheap and effective communication to the rest of the world. So that is why we have our web platforms, we have information on ourselves, which we see that is readily available to our clients. And this is the means of growing business. But are we all going to start looking at work from home? And that's not going to happen. And especially in the businesses that we run, which are small to medium businesses. We run our business by example. We run our business by being there. We run our business because our employees ensure and see that we are working 10 hours and 12 hours to where they are working 8 hours. We set example to them by physically being there. If you're not there, you're not going to be able to run your business. If you're going to have people sitting at home, you're not going to be able to monitor them. You're not going to be able to have anything. And my feeling is this, that the moment the lockdown is lifted slowly and slowly and slowly, man is a social animal. We are going to get back to interacting with each other. And there is going to be a bit of a backlash, or sort of a positive backlash, in the sense that we are going to go out more often because of the fact that we have been cooped up unnaturally in our homes for the last 3 months. And we've had no other activity. We've not been able to go to our clubs, to our gyms, to malls, to restaurants, or just go for a drive somewhere. We've not been able to do that. So there is going to be no new normal. We will have to adapt. We will have to continue to change. Those businesses who are not that technologically, in a sense, in sync with the rest of the world, will get in sync with the rest of the world. We'll spend a little extra money. But I don't personally feel that this is going to change. Even the major IT majors, they are not going to see a work from home attitude going forward. They would want to put people under one roof. They would want interaction. They would want that to happen wherever it is going to happen. So overall, as I said, it is a challenge to individual entrepreneurship. We will individually have to look at our business. What has been our reserves? Are we going to expend all our reserves in the next 3 or 4 months? Are we going to retain some of those reserves so that we can meet the challenges as we go ahead? Again, in an overall economic scenario, I tend to agree with one of the earlier speakers. This whole China thing is not going to work for us. That can only work incrementally and marginally with people who are setting up new industries. But nobody is going to relocate and close down their businesses in China or anywhere else in the world where they have made huge investments in plant and machinery and time, right? So nobody is going to turn around and say, China is the villain in this piece, so okay, let's all withdraw from China and teach China a lesson. That is not going to happen. So we will have to fight our own ways through. Maybe there is a sentiment which we could sort of exploit and get a little extra business for ourselves. But we have also then got to be in a position to be able to fulfill that opportunity. And nobody is willing to give us a second chance. So we are going to be able to step up. And if we have to compete with the likes of China, we will have to step up our capabilities, our delivery schedules, our timetables. So that is basically my feedback from a personal experience. Things were not well even before COVID set in. We didn't see the incremental growth that we were planning to. There were losses in business for most. The automobile industry was anyway going down. There wasn't automobile sales. So overall, the growth was going to be down to about 4%. We are going to go see negative growth no matter what people are going to say. We are going to face huge problems in terms of labor, in relocation of migrant labor, getting them back to work again. We are ourselves seeing the costs which are increasing because of the fact that there is no labor available. We are seeing that things are coming to a standstill because there is no labor available. And to get them back, it's going to take time. But again, on one score, I'm an optimist, is that if you can last out 6 to 8 months of the coming 6 to 8 months, you will be much stronger and you will be in a much better place. So it's going to be survival and the survival of the fittest. So once again, I have to thank BA for the opportunity, and also we will continue to work for you in terms of recognizing you as an integral part of the services industry in India. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Davar. Thank you for a very, very encouraging, realistic, but a very optimistic look on business. I would now like to invite Gautam. Gautam Nair is the chairperson and managing director of the Matrix group of companies, as well as the chairman, CII Task Force on Investment and Sourcing, and a member of the executive committee, AEPC. Gautam, you are a successful business person working across India, Bangladesh, Vietnam, and Jordan. What are your views on today's world?
Ruma, thank you. And thank you, Christine, for having me on your webinar today. You know, like Mr. Davar, I like to think of myself as the realist. But there's something about Harminder, who I have been on various forums with over the years. There's something about his optimism, which, and I hope that's a bad analogy, but which, like the coronavirus, is infectious. And before I answer your question and I go to the topic at hand, I'm going to start on a note of optimism. We call it the Harminder effect. That in this doom and gloom period, which we've been through in the last 2.5 months or 3 months now, almost 3 months now, we were all exactly the way Harminder put it. You know, we were going to the classic first stage of, you know, it cannot be. How can this happen? How can this happen to us across the world? And just complete unacceptance of what is happening to us. When a few of us got a call from our Ministry of Textiles saying that, you know, there was a humanitarian project they wanted to involve the apparel industry in, and it involved manufacturing of PPE. Believe me, a lot of us didn't know what PPE meant. But in the next few weeks, very few weeks, completely working with the ministry, getting a new product which we didn't know how to spell, getting it off the ground from scratch in a period of lockdown, getting textile factories opened up to make fabrics, getting our garment factories opened up to make, first sample rooms opened up to make the sample. It was a huge logistical exercise, sending a sample, something we should do on a daily basis. It involved 4 curfew passes to get a sample from my factory in Khandsa, Gurgaon, to Coimbatore, to Sitra in Coimbatore. We went through all this, getting machines air freighted from China, talking, thanks to the government of India, to our consul generals in Guangzhou and in Hong Kong, who are trying their very best to help you put goods on a flight. We did all that. And today, I understand if the media is correct, they say that India in the last 2.5 months has built a PPE industry, which is the second largest in the world.
Wow.
In a period of lockdown. I understand that the Bill Gates Foundation and the Harvard Business Review are actually doing a case study on this. I didn't come onto this forum to talk about that, but I told you it's the Harminder effect, where you talk about seizing an opportunity, or sometimes he gave the example of the big Sri Lankan manufacturers who went after not just the constraints or the limited resources they had, but went after a long-term opportunity. Well, here in this case, it is a short-term opportunity, but it has become a big area of focus for the apparel industry, which we like to think we've done very successfully. And a few of us are taking, again, following Harminder's advice, are taking it further and actually thinking of verticals within our apparel setup to be a PPE manufacturer, not only for India, but also for the world, because we expect PPE to open up. But to come to your specific question, Ruman, you know, I think we're going to talk of the world in 3 distinct periods. 2 very clearly before us, one which we see with some hope happening, I hope, in the foreseeable future. The period before COVID, the period during COVID, which we're all going through right now, and hopefully will come, I hope it's sooner and not later, to a period after COVID. The period we're going through now is perhaps one of the most, I mean, I've been in export business for 40 years, and without a doubt, nothing has come close to the kind of challenges we have seen in the last 2.5 months, and the challenges we expect to see going forward. This is the, you know, in the export business, we like to think that you've hedged your bets. You're working with the US, you're working with Europe, you're working with Asia Pac. So if something goes wrong in one market, you're hedged in the other market, and so on. This is one of those rare times in the history of the world, perhaps, when everything is down. I mean, every market we're working with is equally affected, some more than most, some recovering a little quicker, but there's really, really bad news across the line. And it's not over. We've seen a number of the most iconic or the most oldest, most respected brands go down. We're seeing brands before us totter. So this is going to play out for some time. It's very likely to get worse before, hopefully, it starts getting better. Consumer demand is very, very tough to predict now. And, you know, you talk to 3 different consultants and you get 3 completely different figures. Somebody will tell you about a V-shaped recovery. Somebody will talk about a W-shaped recovery. But, you know, you can talk about different letters of the alphabet. One thing which is pretty clear is that consumer demand, you cannot take it for granted. There's going to be a new normal, and none of us know what that new normal is going to be. So what do we do in this circumstance, to answer what Ruma was saying specifically? I think this is a great time to, you know, to press not just the pause button, but the rewind button. A crisis is too good an opportunity to waste. And I think one of the speakers did say, I think it was, again, Harminder who said that, you know, there are a number of things we're doing in our businesses which we know can be done better, which we've been fence-sitting on. We know it needs to change, but you're so busy with your day-to-day humdrum of work that you tend to leave it behind. This is a great time to take stock and focus on, you know, try to reimagine your business on a blank sheet of paper. And you cannot waste the opportunity of this crisis to change that, to try and change that. What are we specifically doing? I must qualify that I'm speaking from the perspective of my business or our industry, which is the apparel export industry, apparel and leather export industry. One, we've been pushing in a low to medium way, digitization in design, digitization in product development, and even digital manufacturing, how we can transcend it to our supply chain and to manufacturing. And that is one area. We have got on product development front, because of the restrictions on travel and because of the terrific availability of broadband, I think our you know, in digitalization of design, you cannot do it unless there is a buy-in from the customer end. And we've got a huge buy-in by force from the customer end. So these habits, which are very difficult to change, because everybody assumes design and product, whether it's in apparel or in home, it's a touchy-feely thing. Unless you see it, you know, all that is being destroyed by circumstance, by force. And this is a great time for us to capitalize on it. And this is one thing which we are working on, and I'll advise anybody who's listening to this, who comes from this industry, to also work on it. This is also a great time to rethink the way your business should be done. Again, one of the speakers talked about we have never seen migration to us in all the years I've been in business has always been people leaving rural areas to come to urban areas. What we have seen in the last 2 or 3 months, what we are seeing before us, and what we're going to see a lot of going forward, this new normal of workers streaming back. I think it's more than being just transient. I think there's a certain amount of a structural shift which is also happening. I think industry, urban planners, we're going to pay for some of the sins which we've committed in terms of the way migrant workers were looked after or not looked after when they were working in factories, but the kind of slums they lived in, the kind of living conditions they had, and how I think the realization from their side of how utterly dispensable they were in what could be a pretty hostile environment. I don't see that new normal being very favorable to industry unless we change dramatically. And one of the things I think we should be doing, and this is something which some members of our industry have started several years ago. Harvinder mentioned Shahi Export. Harish Ahuja has done that. He was a visionary who saw that, started doing that several years ago. Some of us lesser mortals have been doing it in more recent times. And I believe that has to accentuate going forward. In other words, put your units where the workers are and not expect you be the migrant and bring your factory out there. Let workers come from neighboring areas. It's not a coincidence that when we restarted our operations, our factory in Ranchi took the shortest amount of time to come back on stream because the workers all live around. Again, another place to leverage the advantages of good connectivity, good digital connectivity, and good broadband availability in India to do that. We found, I haven't been to my factory for the last 2.5 months. And I got to say, I'm at least 95% as productive, in some cases perhaps more productive, not getting in people's hair, but at least, the coordinating from here, which has worked out pretty well. I believe this is something which we can build upon, particularly in shifting our factories to where the workers are. Having a second shift in operation. This is something which we've been talking about. Again, the Sri Lankan manufacturers have proven it in Sri Lanka, and the same Sri Lankan manufacturers have proven it in India. If you see the intimate factories in Chennai or around Chennai, or you see the Bandix factories in Visakhapatnam, they work on a very well organized, very seamless double shift operation. The rest of the industry hasn't been able to do it. In fact, we frankly say it can't be done. Today is the time when we can make that happen. We made it happen for PPE in our factory. A reasonably sizable second shift working. Still having problems in doing that, in extending that because of a lack of availability of workers around Gurgaon, the problem we're facing now. But in our factories, which are more in the hinterland, our Ranchi factory, for example, we expect to go into second shift production by the end of this month, and that is going to be there to stay. If you look at India overall in the manufacturing space, what is the, there have been some recent big ticket announcements by the government in terms of which have the potential to actually really shape industry going forward. Let me just talk of two serious announcements. One is the whole focus on an Atmanirbhar Bharat, an India which is self-reliant. We already had a focus on Make in India. And if you combine these two, you're going to see and look at the big reforms done in the MSME sector. If you put these three, you connect the dots on this, I think there's going to be a renewed focus on manufacturing. And I think the MSME sector can play a big role in manufacturing, much bigger a role than it's played in the past. I think a lot of new opportunities have come up. Again, Harvinder talked about some of them. There are new opportunities in protective clothing. There are new opportunities coming up in India in the whole MMF, in the man-made fiber apparel textile business. India hardly competes in that, even though it has somewhere between a 60 and a 70% world market share. I think we're going to see a lot of interesting investments coming in there, made partly from Indian industry. And I know that there is a lot of interest from outside players who are looking at India as being a potential source of a product which India has never been known for in the past. The same with technical textiles. Another, I think, the last 2 months of this pandemic have shown the tremendous potential and the underutilization of this potential in India. And I believe that's going to develop going forward. If there's one message I have for all our friends, our colleagues in the industry, it is that don't go back to business as usual. This has been a big, I mean, it's a huge opportunity we've had to change ourselves, a huge time for reflection. And if we can change that, if we can do a SWOT analysis of, the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats in our industry, address those weaknesses, leverage the opportunities, I think we're looking at a bright future ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gautam. I think we have a unanimous Harminder effect that we are going to look optimistically today and further tomorrow. Christine, would you like to take up the questions? Would you have some questions for our panelists and for our speakers?
I'm actually just looking. I'm looking at the time, and I think we have overshot quite massively. So what I'm going to say is, I think it was absolutely brilliant panel. Mr. Davar has had to leave because he said he had another appointment, so he sent his apologies. But I think very, very interesting, and I would like to make sure that we are able to circulate any information from our first three speakers. Harminder, I think many people could do with your dose of optimism. So if you've got an app handy that we can send to people who need it. No, I'm seriously, I think it's fabulous. And Kadambari and Saji, really well put, and totally, different ways of looking at our businesses, whether it's us as agents. I mean, I think definitely, as Gautam and Harminder and Mr. Davar all said in their own ways, we do need to look at reinventing, and also helping, as I said, we play this role that we can, educate or guide our smaller factories. Obviously, companies like Matrix are already out there, but there's a huge amount of opportunity, as well as, things, a reason to change the way we are doing stuff. I totally agree. It should not be business as usual. It should be, okay, now we've got the time, we've been sitting home for 2.5 months. What are we looking at doing differently? And, that PPE story, Gautam, I think was very relevant, and good to hear that we were able to do it. And interesting to hear that the Sri Lankan intimate apparel factories have come in and are revolutionizing the industry. And I think we do need to see where we can learn, all of us, because it is about learning what other people do better and figuring out how to fit it into our environment. So I'm going to stop at that. I don't know, Ruma, how you want to handle until there are a few questions there for some of the panelists.
I think we can ask the panelists to reply. Yes,
yeah.
I will request the panelists to reply to that and send out emails to all our attendees. But thank you, everybody. This was a scintillating meeting. Remember the plan B. Remember to focus on your core strength, collaborate, look at your contracts, look at today, look at the opportunities, build on tomorrow. And, tomorrow is a new world. This is a new world today. And good luck to all of you. Good luck to India. For Make in India, make it local. Thank you all very, very much.
Thanks, Ruma.
Thank
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Gautam.
Thank
nice
you.
to meet you, Harminder.
Thank you.
Thank you, Saji.
I must comment about one thing. In the 40 years that I've been in the apparel industry, one of the most wonderful things about the people in this industry is their adaptiveness and they're back to work 3 days before rather than 3 days after. And
never give up. And never give up.
Instilled in Gautam and Harminder that, it's just like wonderful deja vu. It brings you, it makes you feel so positive in the basic qualities of the people that we have in this industry to make it move forward in the way we like to move. Instead of 3 steps back, we'd rather be 10 steps forward and get it going than think about it too much. Wonderful. Thank you so
Take care,
much, everybody. and
Have a
thanks
good
for
weekend.
Thank
inviting
you,
me.
Kadambari. Thank you, Saji, Gautam, Mr. Agarwal, Harminder. Thank you for everybody who attended this session. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Giving us over.